Hi, I'm Geof Ellingham. I'm the chair of the Agile Business Consortium, and I'm recording this in New York, so I'm a temporary refugee from Brexit Britain. And I'm here to talk about something rare and beautiful, a great British government success story. The tale I want to talk about is how the UK went from being a laggard in the field of e-government to being the world's number one. It's a story that has strategic leadership at its heart, an agile culture, and a razor-sharp focus on user experience. So a little bit about me. I've been involved in technology and education for 30 years, and the last decade I've been running an IT department in local government in the UK. And digital transformation, digital government has been what that's been all about. So I'm really passionate about how we harness technology for public services. And I think that the digital transformation of government around the world is one of the biggest challenges and opportunities for scaled Agile in the world today. The Agile Business Consortium is something you may not have heard of because we've only had that name for 2 years. But the consortium's been around since before the dawn of Agile. Back in the 1990s, there were individuals and organizations who were getting really frustrated with waterfall project management, the old way of doing things in IT. And they formed together to create something called the DSDM Consortium and published the DSDM Agile Project Framework. And along with Scrum and XP, that was one of the first 3 Agile frameworks, the original set. It was a membership organization, a not-for-profit, and we're still a membership organization and a not-for-profit. And over the next years, the consortium evolved and iterated around the framework. In 2001, Ari von Bennekom for the consortium was a signatory on the Agile Manifesto, and we continue to iterate, we continue to develop. And then in 2010, we got together with APMG International and decided that the world needed an Agile project management qualification, something that we could use to spread the word. And that's now the leading Agile project management qualification in the world. It's called Agile PM, and some 80,000 people around the world have taken that qualification now. And that qualification has been successful, and that's meant as a not-for-profit that we have revenues that we have to spend doing good. So we've been working out over the last few years, how do we give back to the community and to the world that needs agility? And we've decided that business agility, taking Agile outside of IT, enabling people to take those ideas and mindsets and principles and use them in other ways is what's really needed. So we rebranded ourselves the Agile Business Consortium 2 years ago, and we're working with anyone who shares our values to bring business agility to the world. So in New York, for example, the Business Agility Institute is working with us on this mission, and it is a mission. And then just this year, we're going to be launching something called Agile Digital Services, and I mention that because it's part of the story that we're going to tell today. So here we have it in pictures. We have the very dated-looking DSDM handbook from 1995. We have the Agile PM course handbook that's out there today delivering Agile project management for people. And then the framework for business agility with our core competence, our history, Agile products and services, programs, portfolio is at its heart, but then wrapped around with Agile culture and leadership, Agile strategy, Agile enablement and governance, and then Agile operations, IT and finance, because those are the areas that we see as really critical in bringing business agility to the world. And leading, promoting and enabling business agility worldwide is the mission. It's a very big mission, but it's really important to us. So back to the story. I thought I'd start with this picture. So what does this picture say to you? What kind of organization does this look like? You can see post-it notes and things over on the walls at the back. There's lots of stuff that shows collaboration going on. There's an interesting little sticker down here in the corner that says, ask people what they do, not what they want. So it looks like a pretty Agile kind of place. Agile is more than just post-its, but it feels like something modern. This is the Department of Work and Pensions, just down the road from me in Newcastle upon Tyne in the UK. This is right at the heart of government. And I show this picture because to me this doesn't look like what I think of when I think of government. And the whole of this story is about things that don't look like government and the impact of not doing things the way that government has always done has on things. So here's the survey, here's the table that I talked about right at the start with the UK at the top of the United Nations e-government survey from 2016. And it's great to see us at the top, but if you look at the little graph by the side where for some strange reason up is bad and down is good, you'll see that we haven't been number one for a long time. In fact, if you go back to about 2009, 2010, we were one of the worst performers. So when we're telling the story, we have to think about what was it that was happening around 2010 that changed things up, and what was it that happened since then that's allowed that momentum to continue. So there are some clues that we can look at when we look back. We'll start with this one. David Cameron, the former Prime Minister of Britain. I believe that the creation of government digital services is one of the great unsung triumphs of the last Parliament. So this has got something to do with politics, it's got something to do with government, and it's got something to do with this government digital services thing, what we in the UK call GDS for short. But that's only part of the story. There's another really important piece of context, and it comes out of this note. Dear Chief Secretary, I'm afraid there's no money. Best wishes and good luck, Liam. Those of you in the UK will recognise this and know that this was a real thing. This was a real handwritten note left in the Treasury Department at the change of government in 2010. Because in 2010, the change of government was based on something that happened just before. And the third context is all about money. So in 2008, we have this maelstrom of stuff going on in the financial markets, starting just down the road in Fifth Avenue at Lehman Brothers and rippling out around the world. And the UK wasn't affected as badly as some countries like Greece, for example, but it was affected pretty badly and partly led to the collapse of the Gordon Brown Labour government at the election in May 2010. So from May 2010, we start counting. This letter you'll see is the incoming government coming in and finding a letter saying there's no money left. Now we'll put aside for a minute the political foolishness of writing a letter that's going to be waved around in press conferences for years afterwards, which of course it was. But just think about what that means in government. You're coming in, you want to do things, and finances are really, really depleted. And one of the things that the Cameron government looked to save money was digital government. They knew from seeing the likes of Amazon and people kind of building up stuff in the private sector that it was possible to be efficient and effective in digital services. But when we looked around at digital government in the UK in those days, as you saw from that graph earlier, things weren't so great. There were hundreds of little websites. Each department had its own website. If you wanted to get something done, you'd need to know which department serviced that particular need. What was the service called inside that department? What form did you need? And you probably needed to download the form and print it out. So things were pretty poor. And the government made a really, really good decision. They knew they needed someone to advise them, and they picked someone called Martha Lane Fox. Now, Martha Lane Fox had been a really successful digital entrepreneur in the dot-com era. She founded lastminute.com, she went on to join the board of Twitter and so on, and in 2009, just before our story starts, she was made the UK's digital champion. She was given the job of getting the UK online, of setting up learning centres in coffee shops and schools, educating parents and anybody who wasn't online and trying to get things moving. They called it Race Online 2010, and that was her mission. And then she was called into the government in 2010 in September time and asked would she take on this really important job of looking at all of the British public services on the internet and working out how to make them work better and more efficiently. And she took the job on and she went off and she wrote a report. And she wrote that report in about 4 weeks. And in her report, pretty skinny report, but very strategic, there were just 4 recommendations. So recommendation number 1, create a single website for government. That sounds really obvious, but it was pretty revolutionary at the time. If you think about something like Amazon as a good model for this, if I want to buy something from Amazon, I don't need to know who makes the thing. I don't need to know who sells it. I don't need to know how they get it into the country. I don't need to know what the logistics are for delivering it to me. All I need to do is go to Amazon, type in the thing that I want, buy it, and it will appear at my door the next day. Now that was revolutionary in logistics and private sector enterprise, Martha Lane Fox's vision was to do the same thing in government. I shouldn't need to know which department does the thing that I want them to do for me. I shouldn't need to know what they call it. I shouldn't need to know what their internal processes are. All I should need to do is go to a single website, which ends up being called gov.uk, and say, I want this, and they should be able to do it for me. So that's the vision. Number 2, open up data to third parties through APIs. Back in these days, governments were spending a lot of time trying to create publicly facing websites that would give people information. A really good example of this is Transport for London. So Transport for London is the body that's responsible for the red buses and the tube trains. And back in these days, they were spending a huge amount of effort and time and money in trying to create journey planners, because everyone was doing journey planners. So if I want to get from one part of London to another, how do I change trains? Which trains do I get? Do I go on a bus? So they put all this money in, but it's really expensive, not just to build a service like that, but to maintain it. And at some point, somebody realized, and Martha Lane Fox captured it here, that if you make that data public, so if you share what your timetables are and where the trains run, and ideally the real-time information about where the buses and the trains are at any one time, somebody like Google Maps will come along and gobble that data up and then spit it back out again to consumers in the way that they want it. And not only will that cost you almost nothing, because all you have to do is provide the data, but it integrates. So it's great if I want to get from North London to South London, I can use the Transport for London Journey Planner. But if I want to get from Edinburgh to Dover going through London, I don't want to have to go to different websites. I want to go to Google Maps, put in Dover, and have it take me all the way down the train system, change onto the London Underground, get a bus, come out the other end, get on a train, get down to Dover. So that's what that's all about. It reduces costs, but it actually means that better services end up in the hands of citizens. So number 3 is giving absolute control to a central team to look after user experience. Now that doesn't sound very agile to a lot of people, because a lot of people have the idea that agile is not about control. Agile is just about getting on with stuff and doing some stuff and putting some post-its on the wall and delivering some stuff. And the problem is that as you scale that up, if you're talking about a government, you need clear direction. And agile is really about a dynamic tension between, on the one hand, clarity of direction and strategy, and on the other hand, empowering people who are closest to the information to deliver on that strategy. So this is about the direction. Give clear direction about the user experience, because if you do that, then the person who's going around this one website, which of course is really going to be provided by lots and lots of different departments, is going to be able to feel as if they're moving through a single place, that whichever bit of the website they go to, it'll behave in the same way. And finally, appoint a new CEO for digital to direct all online spending. Now that's again, doesn't sound very agile up front, but this is the reality of government. If you allow anyone to spend on online, those hundreds of websites are going to start trickling up again as departments decide, oh, I need this and I haven't got time to go through the central process. So giving the center control over the spend means you get to maintain that focus on user experience. And her report said, start hiring now. And they did start hiring now. So again, the timetable clicks on. October, Martha Lane Fox writes her report. November, the Cabinet Secretary, Francis Maud, replies and said, yeah, go, let's get on with it. By February the next year, so only 3 months later, they have a team in Hercules House in London of bright young things brought in from the private sector who are starting to build a prototype. And they're given just 10 weeks to create a prototype for a new website for government. 10 weeks. And 10 weeks and 1 day later, they deliver their prototype. So now we're not even a year on from the election. Usually a report takes a year to write in government. In this particular case, in a year, we've managed to come in, diagnose the problem, work out what the strategic solution is, get a team up and running, and deliver the first real product. As I said before, none of this looks like government. And actually, when you look at that team, it doesn't look like government either. It's a team of, as I said, bright young things from the private sector, but it has really clear direction and leadership. It's a group of people who are self-organising. They're a cross-functional, multi-skilled team working together on pizza and beer to deliver something at high speed. What it looks like to me is a tech startup. There's a picture there's a guy called Richard Pope, who was a product manager in the early days of GDS, which is what this thing was called, Government Digital Services. And this is a picture of what they thought as a team the gov.uk website might look like. So as I say, this looks like a tech startup. Interestingly, when you look at that picture, the gov.uk actual website has gone through quite a lot of iterations since then, but it looks remarkably today like that picture that Richard Pope drew on that flip chart all the way back in 2010. So as I say, it doesn't look like government, it looks like a startup. And so producing a prototype in 10 weeks is pretty impressive, but that's what tech startups do. So that's not so impressive. The fact that government gave a tech startup the job or created a little incubated tech startup, that's quite impressive. But what's really, really impressive is not just that chapter of the story, but the next chapter. Because having created a little tech startup with a prototype of this new single website for government, what we have to do now is scale it. And this is an enormous scaling challenge because we're talking about taking a tiny little thing and rolling it out over one of the world's biggest public sector bureaucracies. And so the real surprise, the thing that's so amazing, is the little agile baby didn't get gobbled up by the big bureaucratic dinosaur of government. And I think it's worth us just spending a little bit of time thinking about how and why that happened. And I think it's down to a couple of things. First of all, if you go back to the Agile Manifesto, we talk about individuals and interactions over processes and tools. And GDS took that to heart. So they didn't, when they set out to roll this out, tell people, you have to use these tools, you have to use this process, you have to use this version of Agile. What they did was focus on principles and people. The principles are fantastic. Everything here is usable, and I would recommend that you use these principles. So these are the government's design principles. Start with user needs. Curiously, if you look at the agile methods that are out there, most of them don't start with user needs. Most of them start with business need. But government was really clear. This is about citizen over government. If there's a conflict between the needs of the citizen and the needs of government, all other things being equal, if it's practical, the needs of the citizen comes first. So this is about user research. Do you remember that post-it note, that little card that we saw on the picture in the DWP? It said, ask people what they do, not what they want. The traditional way of understanding user needs is to do focus groups or to do surveys. But what you're asking people to tell you then is, what do you want? And that gets filtered through all kinds of psychology and expectation. What you really need to do is go and be with somebody in the place that they need the thing that they need and see what they do. How do they go about getting that need met now? What kind of challenges and blockers do they find? So we move from kind of traditional surveys to user research, to going out and spending time with people. Do less. So that means being modular. It's that stuff around the APIs and getting other people to do things where you can. It's about reusing patterns and reusing code. It's about a little bit more than that too. On the back of the Agile Manifesto, for those of you who know it well, it has 12 principles. I have a favorite. My favorite principle is principle number 10. Principle number 10 goes like this. Simplicity, the art of maximizing the work not done, is essential. I'll just repeat that. The art of maximizing the work not done. If you're thinking about agile transformation and you're looking for the first big gain, where's the first big saving? It's there. It's the projects you don't start, the features you choose not to deliver, the little bits of things that as you evolve, you recognize don't bring value with them. The work not done is where the savings come from. Next, design with data. Don't fall into the trap that so many people do of building something and leaving the analytics and the reporting to the end thinking they're an add-on. Because if you're trying to adopt agile practices, especially the kind of thing that's talked about in lean startup, strategic experiment and quick failure and pivoting, you have to have the data back from your services to tell you, what are people doing? How are people using it? Is it doing the things that you expected? Are you getting the results that you expected? So data needs to be built in and always on. Do the hard work to make it simple. It's easy to build websites. It's hard to build them so they're easy to use. So that means using user experience people, really focusing on the user experience, that razor-sharp focus I talked about earlier. Iterate, then iterate again. This is the Agile bit. And this is almost all it says about Agile. It doesn't go into lots of processes. It leaves teams to work that out for themselves. But it is really clear that you need to build iteratively. And in fact, if you go into the text, you'll find the terminology they use is iterate wildly. I think that's fantastic. Who would expect to see that in government? Iterate wildly. This is for everyone. It's really important in public services to remember that the people that need the services most are often the people who find it hardest to access them. So we have to make sure that we're building this in a way that's accessible, that we're using simple words, and that we're using the kind of models that people might be familiar with from something like Facebook, so that things are where people expect them to be. Understand context. People are not going to access government websites sitting at a desk at home on a desktop computer. You need to understand where they're going to be and what they're going to be doing and what kind of challenges come with that. So we're back to user research again. Build digital services, not websites. This is where collaboration comes in. So if you go into that DWP office that I showed you before, one of the things that's remarkable about it is the technology people are not sitting in one place and the operations people in another. It's one big team. Because when you're building a service, it's end to end. You need to be thinking about how I use technology along the way, not here's a website and now it's going to go over to operations. So you need to integrate your team, integrate your thinking, think about value streams. Don't think about websites. Be consistent, not uniform. So I talked earlier about the user experience being consistent, but that doesn't mean that when you're building the stuff in team levels, you need to do everything the same way. So you do what's best for the service, you just make sure that the user experience stays consistent. And finally, make things open because it makes things better. And open is a huge thing. I like to use the term radical transparency. Be transparent about your successes, but be open about your failures. Share everything. All of this stuff from GDS is available on the internet. Go to gov.uk service manual now, Google it, read that stuff, use it in your businesses because it's 10 years of accumulated understanding of how to deliver really great public services. And we're not just talking about these design principles. Okay, so that's at the team level. I get that. In government, you can do stuff at team level. You can't change things further up. Let's talk about governance, because governance in government is difficult. Changing governance is difficult. Government is full of hierarchy. It's stuck. It's like wading through treacle. So GDS has come up with governance principles that are in use today and try to change the way that that works. So number one, don't slow down delivery. Your job as a leader, and people have to be taught this anew because it's different. Your job as a leader is to serve. It's to look for impediments, the things that are in the way of your team, and scoot them out of the way of your team so that your team can get on with their work. And then your job is to get out of the way and let your team get on and do what they do. And how do you deal with those hierarchical stovepipes? How do you stop decisions getting pushed up the tree and then coming back down again? You do it by making decisions when they're needed at the right level. And what that means is giving your teams bounded empowerment. So making sure that within a time frame or within a set of constraints, they're empowered to make whatever decisions they need to make as they're going along. They have access to the people that they need to make those decisions. If you have a decision that has to be made at a higher level, you need to get them to come to you, and they need to come now, because delivery and flow is everything. Do it with the right people. So hire the right people and trust them to get on with the job. Don't get in their way. Don't give them menus and instruction manuals about what to do. Make sure you have the right people. Go see for yourself. This is transformational. In Agile, we talk about transparency a lot. We have these boards. We use Kanban boards. We use things that enable us to show what we're doing all the time. So we don't want to be asked by senior managers to go along with a PowerPoint slide to a room and present and talk about what we've been doing. We want people to come to us. And it's not just to come and see what's on the walls and see where we're at. That's great. It's to share what we're doing. We say, show, don't tell. So don't tell me about the service that you're building. Show me what it's doing. Show me a prototype. Let me see it in reality. So we're getting leaders to come and see for themselves. Only do it if it adds value. What do we mean by that? Well, first of all, the team itself needs to know what value looks like. So the team needs to be told not just build this thing, but why are you building this thing? What's your goal? What is it we're trying to achieve? Because if the team understands what it needs to achieve, it's able to make those decisions. It's able to say to itself, okay, we're doing this stuff and it's not helping us towards this goal, so let's just stop. I know I was told to do it, but it's not working. We're going to stop. This other thing that we're doing, this is generating value we hadn't spotted. We've come up with, in our user research, some ideas for doing this in a new way, and it's paying dividends, so let's do more of it. And finally, and I guess summing all of this up, trust and verify. There's a quote that I think is from Warren Buffett that says, the key to getting things done is to hire trustworthy people and then trust them a lot. I think that's a great quote. That's what we need to be doing. Trust and then verify means have whatever processes you need after the fact to check that people are doing the things that they're not and course correct if you need to. But without trust, you don't have speed and you don't have flow. So this is a great story and I like telling it, and it's important for people to know about it, and it's important for people to know that these design principle things are out there and that you can use them. But what's it got to do with the Agile Business Consortium? And it's because Agile and digital should go together really beautifully. It's built into those design principles, all that iteration. But we started to become aware of the fact that as GDS was trying to scale this out, roll out these new principles, these new ways of working, they were running into some problems, in particular with training, because they were going out to the market, to the courses that are out there, Scrum Master courses, our Agile PM course, and bringing these courses in and training people up. And there was a mismatch. And I can illustrate it fairly easily by just looking at something from our course. So this is the evolutionary development process in Agile PM. It's our kind of model of how a really high level iterative development works. And in the GDS handbook, they have their own process. It's called the Service Design Lifecycle, and it looks like this. And when you look at those two things, even though they say similar things conceptually, there's not a word on those two images that's the same. There's nothing about them that looks the same. And why is that a problem? Well, it's a problem because if you're a delegate going on a training course, you don't want to be told to learn the stuff on the left because you're going to need it for your exam. But when you go back to work on Monday, you're going to need to know the stuff on the right, and that's what you're going to be using. So it creates conflict for people when they're going through these courses. And there's loads of examples of it. So there's the life cycle, the roles. Every Agile method has its own set of roles. But GDS has its own roles and they don't match up. There are products, we talk about different routines and different ceremonies, and none of it matches. And user research, as I said earlier on, none of us talk about user research. And in GDS, it's the start of everything. So it's a real problem. The training that was available when you're trying to scale things out wasn't giving people what they needed to be effective within GDS in delivering these new digital services. And what we want is happy delegates on courses who get what they want and go home satisfied. So we decided that we would take a look at the way that we approach learning. And we would use the GDS digital lifecycle, the service lifecycle, as our model for how we developed whatever we were going to develop. So we started with user research. We got people together at conferences. We asked them questions. What is it that's causing problems? What is it that makes it difficult for you? What could we do to help? And it became fairly clear as we were going through this kind of user research that we needed to take much more of that GDS stuff. We needed to go and raid the GDS handbook. I talked about keeping things open. It's so open that anyone can use it. Government wants people to use it. So take the GDS stuff, take the life cycle, take the user research stuff, take those brilliant design principles, and then just take from your method, in our case Agile PM, the bits that add value. So there might be stuff around prioritization and estimating. There might be something about how you scale that's useful to add, but ditch anything that's duplicated in GDS and smoosh them together to create something that's holistic and coherent. And we called ours Agile Digital Services. That's the life cycle in Agile Digital Services, and as you can see, it's just the GDS one I showed you before. And it's worth having a quick look at it because it's a simple, iterative life cycle. It starts with user needs, it starts with user research. So you start with a little team, you've got user researchers, they're embedded in the service team, so all right from the start, this is all embedded. And then you go through discovery, and discovery is taking the insights you've learned from user needs and starting to play with them, starting to ask yourself questions. What are the theories that we're going to test? What are the opportunities that we see? And then we go into alpha, and alpha is all about prototyping. So we're not doing lots of planning as we used to in kind of old-fashioned projects. We're doing very little planning, just enough to get us to alpha, and then we're going to build a load of stuff. We're going to build it cheaply. We're going to use wireframes, and we're going to use prototypes, and we're going to knock up websites. And we're going to try them out on real people. So our user researchers haven't gone home at the ends of user needs. Our user researchers are still there, and they're going out with our prototyping, and we're playing with people. We're putting things in front of people and saying, use that, press that button, what does that do? And we're learning. It's only a prototype. It's not really good for the public yet, but it helps us to learn. And then we go into beta. And usually we split beta into two, private beta and public beta. So in private beta, what we're doing is selecting some people from the public, real people, real users, but we're picking them and we're doing it in a controlled way. And we're giving them something that we think is close to ready to use. And we're giving them an opportunity to try it out for real. So we're delivering a real service. It's not pretend. And we're seeing what happens. And at the point at which we've got a good enough understanding of the security needs and all the rest of it, we move into public beta. And in public beta, we send the thing out into the world and let it live. It's not finished, and we'll put a badge on it saying beta to say it's not finished, but come and use it. Come and try it out because we think it's great. And as we get information back from our public beta, we'll continue to iterate and we'll continue to plan and we'll continue to fine tune until eventually we have something that we're prepared to put a live badge on. So that's the basic life cycle. Now, that's great, but in reality, government services tend to be rather bigger than that. So they look more like this. If you take something like the Ministry of Justice, the Ministry of Justice is going through a big transformation at the moment, and it's got a bunch of services it needs to build. So it needs to build prosecute a case, defend a case, adjudicate a case. Now, you can't deliver those things out of sync. You can't deliver prosecute a case before you've got the defend a case. That wouldn't be fair. So you have to coordinate. So one of the things we've done is suggested models for how you might coordinate across a number of services that have to be delivered as a coherent project. In the same way, we've taken the GDS roles and we've kind of mapped out the ones we think are the critical ones and critical groups, because there's something like 25 of them altogether. And again, we've thought about how you might scale that. So when you've got multiple teams, how might you use those roles in multiple teams and connect them together into a kind of project head? And then we've taken a serious look at user research. So we've gone back to the drawing board and started to deliver in our beta courses user research training. So what is it that people need to do to go out and do really great user research? So that's been our discovery, if you like, and we built that into an alpha, along with some new stuff about increments that take the MVP idea from lean startup. So the minimum viable product is not the smallest thing that you can put out into the world. It's the thing that you build to help you learn. So your minimum viable product should be, it's like the prototypes. It's something that's complete enough to provide learning, but not something you put out into the world. The thing you put out into the world is what we call an MMP, minimum marketable product. And then we continue to iterate, we continue to build increments, and what we're looking for at the end is lovable products. Now, we didn't invent that term. We're doing our user research and our alphas and prototypes, and our users came up with that idea, but we love it. Lovable services, lovable products is what we're aiming for at the end. So we followed the cycle. We went from user needs, we did our discovery, and then we did alphas. So in the old days when we were writing a course, we might just get in a room, write the course and publish it. What we wanted to do here was go through the process that we'd been learning about from GDS. So we alphaed it. We went to Newcastle City Council and delivered a course that we kind of got together from these ideas that we'd been coming up with, working with people who were in government and trainers that we knew. And we went to the Ministry of Justice and we delivered a course there. And we learned a huge amount from just trying it out and took that back. And then we followed on with the process. So user needs, find out what people want, discovery, get some ideas, alpha, try them out. We got that information back and then we went into private beta. So again, we were taking our time to get things right. So in private beta, we went out to 12 public sector organisations of different kinds with our newly iterated materials, and again ran courses, took people through exams, asked them what they thought, checked that they were successful in their exams, asked the trainers what they thought, asked the organisations they were working for what they thought, went to GDS and went through the materials with them and asked them where they thought it fitted and where it didn't, came back with a whole load of new ideas and went out again for another set of private betas, which we've just finished, getting more information and more feedback, getting closer and closer to something that we think is great. And in June this year, we will launch not a live course because it's not perfect yet. We will launch public beta. So anyone who comes on this course later this year is going to find on the handbook, it's got a big red badge saying beta, warning, this isn't finished yet. It doesn't mean we don't think it's great because it's been through more testing than any other course we've ever done. But we recognise that it's not finished yet and we want to signal to people that we are eating the medicine that we're teaching people. And then at some point it will go live. At some point we will find we've iterated enough around our public beta that we'll go live with it. It could be in September, it could be next year. It doesn't matter, it's when it's ready. So we're following the same process that we're teaching people about. And we think it doesn't finish with the UK government. Because yes, the reason that we started this journey was because government was coming to us and telling us that they needed training that fitted better what they wanted to deliver. But I look out at local government where I've come from and the desperate need that we have to educate people in this way of delivering public services. And I look at the health service in the UK, or I look at the kind of not-for-profit sector. And then I look out across the world and the UK's GDS approach to digital services is being picked up in Australia, in New Zealand, in Canada. And I think that this is a approach to delivering public services across the internet that other governments will want to copy. And I think the private sector should be looking at this too. If you're in the private sector and you're in banking or whatever, and you're starting off on your digital journey, yes, you're going to need your processes and your tools and all that stuff. But you know, or you should know, that culture and mindset is going to be the stuff that's critical. So looking at these government digital service design principles and governance principles as a starting point in that cultural journey is something that I would recommend. So what have we learned for ourselves? Well, we've learned that gov.uk is brilliant. The GDS design principles, governance principles are a flagship for how government can do things right. We've learned that if you train people in it, it has to be training them in it. You can't train them in something else. You can't just pick a method off the shelf and say, this is agile, this will work. It needs to be tailored, it needs to fit. And I think that we've learned that there are lessons for agile practice outside government. Certainly we've learned a lot about things like user research we'd never really paid enough attention to before. And we think that it's worth everybody outside of GDS, outside of the UK government, looking in at what's going on, looking in at that story, that amazing success from number whatever we were to number one, done by, as I said before, a focus on good leadership, agile mindset, and a razor-sharp focus on user experience. So that's the story. I hope it's been helpful. Thank you so much.